A medical reckoning: why detransitioners deserve justice and why accountability in gender medicine can't wait. Here's the blunt truth up front. A generation of teenagers and college age kids got fast tracked into irreversible medical interventions on the thinnest evidence based medicine has seen in decades, and some of them are now living with permanent consequences they never fully understood. Tonight, we're going to talk about how we fix that. Two moves: a federal executive order that mobilizes legal help and investigative muscle for detransitioners, and companion legislation that ends business as usual malpractice insurance for these procedures while giving victims decades, yes, decades, to seek justice. If that sounds bold, good. It needs to be. I'm Mark Warsh. Let's talk about a course correction that's overdue.
Their facts collapse, their stories bend, but this AI cuts straight to the end. Welcome to the Mark Warsh Show.
Start with first principles. We don't let 16-year-olds get tattoos because impulse control is still cooking in the prefrontal cortex. We make 18-year-olds pay higher car insurance because the data say they're riskier drivers. But for several years, large parts of the medical establishment waved through puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and even surgeries for minors after cursory assessments, calling it affirmation, declaring it settled, and daring anyone to question it. Meanwhile, Europe, hardly a reactionary outpost, hit pause, moved care into research settings, or sharply restricted it after systematic reviews found the evidence for benefits weak and the risks serious. That's not politics. That's what responsible systems do when data conflict with dogma. And now we're hearing from detransitioners, young adults in their late teens and early 20s, some earlier, some later, who looked for help, trusted experts, and were told a life-defining story about themselves that turned out not to be true. Some discovered unresolved trauma or autism or depression was the root driver of their distress. Some found transition didn't relieve their pain. Some learned they lost fertility, sexual function, or healthy organs they can't get back. Many were never told, plainly and repeatedly, that these consequences are permanent. These aren't YouTube anecdotes. These are plaintiffs, medical records, depositions, and clinics quietly changing policies once the spotlight swings their way. So, what do? Practically, immediately, lawfully? First, an executive order. Detransitioner legal assistance. The purpose is simple. Put the federal government's shoulder behind people who were misdiagnosed under 25 and pushed into irreversible treatments. Direct the Department of Justice to investigate patterns of fraud and negligence. Direct Health and Human Services to fund legal aid for victims. Stand up a federal action registry that does more than collect dust. It becomes a radar screen. Where are the hotspots? Which clinics fast-tracked minors? Which informed consent packets left out crucial risks? When multiple red dots blink in the same place, you don't call it coincidence. You call an investigator. This is not an exotic use of executive power. Presidents set enforcement priorities all the time. DOJ launches task forces on opioids, civil rights, corporate fraud. HHS funds victim services, runs registries, and coordinates cross-agency responses. The novelty here isn't legal, it's moral clarity. We're saying if a 15-year-old's healthy tissue was removed after a 2-visit assessment, the United States will help that young person get answers and, if appropriate, accountability. Definitions matter. A detransitioner is someone who began transition and later ceased or reversed it. Misdiagnosis, in this context, is a gender dysphoria label applied before 25 that led to irreversible treatment and, in hindsight, didn't fit, because the distress was actually OCD, autism, trauma, social contagion, body dysmorphia, you name it. Irreversible means irreversible. Mastectomy, genital surgeries, sterilizing hormone regimens, puberty blockade that arrests biological processes you don't get back. No euphemisms, no marketing gloss. If the change can't be undone, we call it what it is. Now, the registry. This is the most underappreciated piece. A passive form is useless. An active registry is a pattern detector, a way to connect the dots the way tobacco and asbestos litigators did. The same claims cropping up, the same talking points in the same clinics, the same fully reversible promise attached to drugs that aren't. You use that pattern to triage cases for deeper investigation, to alert state medical boards, to inform public health guidance, and yes, to brief prosecutors when deception crosses the line. Let's talk enforcement. DOJ can do more than bring cases. It can file statements of interest supporting private plaintiffs, coordinate multi-state actions, and subpoena records to test whether scripted consent processes were honest or sales brochures. HHS can do more than write checks. It can fund specialized counseling for detransitioners and ensure federal programs cover medically necessary care to mitigate the harms. Too many clinics ghost the moment a patient says, "I made a mistake." Quarterly interagency reviews keep the pressure on. The message to the industry: the era of affirm first, ask questions never is over. The era of show your work has begun. That's the executive order. It helps the harmed. It signals seriousness, but it doesn't change incentives. For that, you need Congress. The second move is federal legislation that rebalances malpractice and liability for gender-affirming medical care. 3 pillars. 1. Exclude these procedures from malpractice insurance coverage. If a provider performs irreversible gender interventions on minors or very young adults, their insurer can't absorb that risk for them. Hospitals must self-insure or providers must assume direct liability. That is not cruelty, that is alignment. When you perform life-altering, low-evidence procedures on vulnerable patients, you should have personal confidence strong enough to stand in front of a jury 10, 20, 30 years later and defend your work, without a faceless policy bailing you out. In every other risky field, liability drives caution. It will here too. 2. Extend the statute of limitations. 30 years for adults, 40 years for minors. Why so long? Because the injuries unfold over time. The realization dawns slowly. The data arrive late. We already do this for childhood sexual abuse because trauma delays disclosure and comprehension. If a woman discovers at 32 that blockers and testosterone at 14 compromised her fertility, she should not be told, "Sorry, the window to sue closed when you were 19. That's not justice. That's a get-out-of-court card for the powerful. 3. Make liability joint and several across the chain. Clinicians, clinics, hospital systems. No passing the hot potato to the therapist who cleared the patient in 2 sessions. No hiding behind a shell LLC that dissolved last year. Everyone who participated in the decision bears responsibility. That's how you force internal policing. Board chairs suddenly care what's happening down in the gender clinic when they realize the whole system writes the check. People will ask, is this constitutional? Yes. Congress regulates insurance markets under the Commerce Clause all the time. It creates and modifies civil causes of action all the time. Ex post facto limits don't apply to civil revivals. And if you're worried about contract impairment, you can phase in the insurance exclusion on new policies. The extended statutes are remedial, not punitive, and tied to continuing harm. Courts have upheld that logic repeatedly. Now the part where I say the quiet part out loud, a chill is the point. When surgeons tell us they'll stop operating on minors if the liability is too scary, here's my response. Good. If the only way you can justify taking a 15-year-old's breasts is with a malpractice backstop and a 2-year lawsuit window, you shouldn't be doing it. Plenty of complex, high-stakes specialties operate under intense liability and still deliver care: neurosurgery, obstetrics, cardiology. They adapted with standards, second opinions, tumor boards, meticulous consent. Gender medicine for minors has to grow up and do the same. Show evidence. Prove durable benefit. Screen out misdiagnosis, or step away. Let's hit the counter-arguments head-on. First, detransition is vanishingly rare. Under 1%, this is a moral panic. That number is a house of cards built on outdated cohorts and lost to follow-up rates that would get laughed out of any other clinical debate. The truth is, we don't know the long-term regret rate because we've never done long-term tracking on this modern adolescent cohort. We do know the denominator exploded in the past decade. Even a modest regret percentage on a vastly larger base is a lot of harmed people. And even if it were small, sterilizing harm isn't acceptable because it's rare. The measure of a system isn't how it serves the happy majority. It's how it safeguards the vulnerable minority. Second, this care is life-saving. Denying it will spike suicides. That claim is wielded like a moral cudgel, and it needs to be retired. Correlation isn't causation. Self-selected survey data aren't destiny, and the best long-term studies don't show a suicide cure-all. What is life-saving in adolescence, consistently, is treating underlying depression and anxiety, stabilizing families, addressing trauma, and giving kids time to pass through developmental storms. For the rare, persistent cases, careful medical intervention may be appropriate, but rare, persistent, carefully vetted is a million miles from affirm on first contact and get the prescription printer warmed up. Fear should never be the engine of consent. Third, you're discriminating against trans people. No, we are protecting minors and young adults from high-risk, low-evidence interventions and giving harmed patients pathways to justice. Adults who want to transition retain that right. The standard isn't different because we dislike a group. It's different because the clinical profile is different. The stakes are irreversible. The population is uniquely vulnerable. The evidence is contested and evolving. That demands bespoke guardrails. In fact, for truly transgender adults, cleaning up this area makes the field more credible. When the worst practices are weeded out, public trust increases. Everyone wins. Fourth, you'll drive care underground. Let's be precise. We are not chilling talk therapy, family support, or psychosocial care. We are chilling surgical removal of healthy organs and puberty blockade for kids who haven't resolved comorbidities. If a clinician's response to accountability is to abandon adolescence entirely rather than practice cautiously and transparently, that clinician probably shouldn't be anywhere near adolescence. And as for black markets, we don't legalize steroids for teens because some will find them illegally. We set norms, enforce laws, and educate. That's called being a society. Now let's talk about why this is urgent, not just important. First, brain development. The prefrontal cortex, the part that manages judgment and long-term planning, matures into the mid-20s. That's not moralizing, that's neuroscience. You don't need a PhD to understand why you don't greenlight irreversible body modifications for people still in the steepest arc of identity formation. We protect kids from their own impulsivity every day in countless domains. Medicine should not be the exception. Second, comorbidity. The youth presenting to clinics in recent years have not, for the most part, been the classic early childhood persistent dysphoria cases. They've been adolescents, often girls, with complex mental health histories, autism spectrum conditions, anxiety, past abuse, social isolation, who suddenly show up with gender distress in the context of friend groups and online communities. Europe saw this and recalibrated. We ignored it. That's how you turn a real condition for a small subset into a one-size-fits-all pipeline for a very different subset. The detransitioners we're hearing from are disproportionately drawn from that latter group. That's not an accident. Third, informed consent. You cannot consent to what you do not grasp. Consent forms that read like marketing copy, minimization of sexual function impacts, glancing mention of infertility without a frank discussion. Those are not ethically adequate. Real consent is repetitive, specific, and sober. Some changes cannot be reversed is not a throwaway line. It is the whole ball game. If you can't bring yourself to say, out loud, in plain English, you may lose the ability to have biological children, to a teenager and her parents, you have no business prescribing the drug that may cause it. Which brings me back to the policy architecture. Picture the executive order in motion. A 19-year-old detransitioner submits her case through the registry. Diagnosed at 13 after 2 visits, blocked at 14, testosterone at 15, double mastectomy at 16. Autism spectrum, noted in school records. No comprehensive psych workup documented. She now has chronic pain, loss of sensation, regrets, and a stack of bills. Under the EO, her case is flagged. Multiple similar reports tied to the same regional system. HHS refers her to funded legal counsel. DOJ pulls marketing materials from the clinic. Blockers are fully reversible, or it's just like hitting the pause button, and asks hard questions. The state medical board gets a nudge with aggregated data showing a pattern. The clinic's leadership suddenly remembers the Hippocratic Oath. Picture the legislation's effect inside a hospital. The chief risk officer tells the board, for these procedures, we're on the hook. No insurance buffer, statutes out to 40 years. We need a new standard operating procedure. What follows is exactly what should have existed all along. Mandatory second and third opinions, a formal review panel, strict age minimums, documented failure of less invasive care, hard stop exclusions for active unmanaged comorbidities, deep dive consent that includes family dynamics, fertility counseling, and sexual function, and, shock of shocks, the number of minors approved plummets. That's not cruelty. That's medicine becoming slow and serious again. Does any of this mean nobody under 18 will ever receive an intervention? No. It means the bar will be where it belongs, extraordinarily high. It means the default is watchful waiting and therapy, not prescriptions and scalpel. It means adults who transition will do so with eyes open and records clear, which is in everyone's interest, including theirs. And if a provider insists this makes their practice impossible, I'd invite them to consider that maybe the practice they've built isn't medicine. It's ideology with a lab coat. You'll hear the usual attempts to derail this conversation. You'll be told detransitioners are made up, or political pawns, or statistically irrelevant. That's how institutions defend themselves when early warning sirens go off. Industry said it about tobacco. Pharmaceutical firms said it about opioids. Hierarchies said it about clergy abuse. The playbook is always the same. Deny, minimize, isolate the critics, and smear the early plaintiffs as cranks. And then the dam breaks. It will break here too. The only question is whether we act before or after the crest. A quick word about compassion, because some will hear all of this and worry about transgender people they love. Compassion cuts both ways. It's compassionate to give a distressed teenager space to grow without branding their body. It's compassionate to tell hard truths clearly so adults can make informed choices. It's compassionate to admit a field jumped ahead of the evidence and correct course. And it's compassionate to stand with those who were hurt, not to look away because their stories complicate a narrative. You don't help anyone by pretending harm didn't happen. So, where do we go from here? If you work in healthcare leadership, audit your practices now. If your informed consent reads like a brochure, fix it. If your assessment protocol is a rubber stamp, tear it up. If you're performing surgeries on minors, ask yourself whether you can defend them to a jury of your neighbors 20 years from now. If the answer is no, stop. If you're a parent, you are not crazy for asking questions. A cautious second opinion is not bigotry. Therapy, first, is not cruelty. If anyone tries to corner you with, do this or your child will die, get a new clinician. A professional who respects you won't sell you fear. If you are a detransitioner, you are not alone and you are not an inconvenience. Your story matters. There are people, many, who want you heard, helped, and made whole. And if you are a transgender adult listening to this, living your life, doing your best, you deserve a healthcare system that earns trust with rigor, not press releases. We can hold two truths at once, that gender dysphoria is real for some, and that our approach to youth in the last decade went badly off the rails. Cleaning up the second helps the first. One last thing, we are a country that eventually fixes our mistakes. Sometimes late, sometimes with too much pain along the way, but we do fix them. We fixed tobacco marketing to kids. We fixed asbestos in schools. We are fixing opioids. We can fix this, not by banning adults from making choices, not by demonizing people seeking relief, but by putting accountability where it belongs and support where it's needed most. An executive order that investigates and aids, a law that aligns incentives with ethics, those are the tools. Behind them, a simple moral sentence. First, do no harm. If a field forgot that, the law will remind it. If powerful institutions prefer slogans to science, the courts will correct them. And if some still insist the rare harmed person is expendable, the public will show them the door. Let's give detransitioners the help they deserve, restore integrity to care for kids, and prove, once again, that the oldest promise in medicine still means something.
Thank you for your attention to this man.